You're listening to The Craft, a podcast for professional content creators who want to learn more about the people, process, and strategy behind the best content on the web. In each episode, we talk with writers, designers, and editors from the world's leading content teams and learn the secrets to their success. Let's jump in and get you inspired for your next story.
Hello and welcome to this episode of The Craft, brought to you by Shorthand. I'm Dawn Murden, VP of Customer Success here at Shorthand. Today, our very special guest is Stuart Feil, who runs Adweek's award-winning content studio, crafting content-driven campaigns for brands that want to reach its audience of marketing decision makers. Stuart, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's really nice to be here, Dawn. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, pleasure to have you on the show. And I'm going to jump straight into it. So, Adweek is a stalwart of the advertising industry. How has the advertising industry changed over the last few decades, and how is Adweek staying ahead of the game?
So I'm gonna shift that one, and I think we can go from decades to weeks or months. You know, we often look at the past 2 years, 3 years, 5 years as a time of massive transition in advertising. And that transition has obviously been driven by technology, by new ways of reaching audiences, by the traditional things that brands did years ago of full page ad in the New York Times or Vogue into, and maybe the occasional television spot into a world that's obviously very, digitally transformed. And then certainly the past 2 years with the massive shifts that have gone on in consumer behavior, not just simply as a result of, there was this thing called a pandemic. So not just simply a result of the shifts that have gone on in that, but what COVID did was just accelerate so many shifts in consumer behavior. So people's shopping behaviors have changed, people's buying behavior, the customer journey has gone from something that was predictable into something that is unique for each individual, right? How you go about discovering a product, learning about it, making that purchase. All of that has gone upside down. We now know more about the people who are shopping, and then, of course, there are all these shifts going on in the world of privacy and all the things that marketers have to now consider, and all the things that they did for the past 5 years. Within the next 12 months, they're going to have to be doing things differently because there are no more cookies, and on and on and on and on. But I think obviously the biggest trend, so if you were to identify the biggest change, it really is the digital transformation of advertising and everything that has occurred in that realm. So, you want to go back decades, we could probably do that, but I think really that is what it means. But I think the other side to all of this is the foundation of what good advertising did has not changed, right? We're talking all about the infrastructure around advertising has shifted, but it does not mean that great storytelling and understanding emotions and really communicating effectively with the people who are going to be your customers and providing them with what they need, that's always been the goal. We always know all of that, and that's still there, and there's nothing that's going to change that. If you can't tell a good story, you're still just going to be ignored.
Great summary. Yes, lots have changed over the last decade, but good to condense it down into recent times in terms of thinking about the most recent changes. And of course, like you say, there's been huge amounts of change over the past couple of weeks, months, and just looking at the two years in terms of buying behavior and habits. But you mentioned storytelling, so it's still very much about that. It's very much at the heart of what Adweek does to stay ahead of the game.
It is. I mean, it's what we do, right? I mean, we're there. Look, we're a news site and insight site for people who are in marketing and advertising. So what we're doing, and certainly our editorial team, is always communicating what's important, right? And part of that is also, what are the great ads out there? If we think of the tent poles of Adweek, right, it's always the Super Bowl, as we talk about. And so is, the running joke of that people watch it for the ads, which I'm sure is fine for some people. But we all understand the ad spend that goes into that when you're paying a few $1 million for a 30-second spot. But there are those things that resonate with people, that surprise them, that are done creatively. And there are those things that you watch it and you're like, what was going on through their mind? Attempts at humor that are not funny, attempts at other that don't work. We all see that. I mean, we see the ads that work. We see whatever entertainment we have that works. And if we're not, again, not telling a good story, not having something that is new, that sort of grabs someone's attention, we're not being successful. And that's true, again, all the coverage that we do. Now, Adweek as a publication and as a media company has gone through its own transformation and how we approach things. The job that I do, right, running a branded content studio, yes, on a certain level, sponsored content has always been there. When I joined Adweek, I mean, it's been about 10 years. But when I joined, we think of anything that we did was a sponsored advertising section, and it ran in the magazine, and it was well scheduled ahead, and there were things that we did to help people and tell some of those stories. That's not, I mean, on rare occasion we pop in with something like that, but branded content overall and sponsored content overall has just taken. Right. It's a really important part of what we do. It's an enormous source of revenue for the company. And it's all part of a really, again, giving. Brands are welcome in a conversation. I think that's something that we always talk about. And so even the brands that want to reach the Adweek audience are welcome in that conversation if they are able to communicate what they need to do effectively. And it's, that's what we do. We're as a content student, we're there to help them tell a really interesting and compelling story.
And I suppose because of your audience, who your audience are, you need to be really good at what you're doing because you're communicating to people that are doing that every day themselves for their audiences. So they're maybe looking at what you're doing with maybe, a harsher critique perhaps as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the bar, I mean, I set a high bar for us, and I'm not sure others in the business set that level of a bar, but our clients, I succeed when our clients succeed. So when I help them tell a better story, and if we can do that, people who are even in marketing, they're not necessarily storytellers, right? We're not necessarily having, great copywriters and creatives coming in and doing branded content. Yes, we have people who want to reach those people, and we have to do that. But not everybody is a great communicator, and certainly not everybody is a really great writer, and we don't expect them to be. But so our job is to enhance that and to help them get noticed and do things that frankly just don't bore our audience. And now the good news is our audience, like every other, they have things that they need to know. And we always think, when we write things, what is it an audience needs to know? What information are they pining for right now? Or that they think, this is something I would love to do. I don't know how to do it. And so much of what we do is explainer content or positioning content or demonstrating expertise. And that is an area where certainly brands, in communicating to an audience, are welcome members of that because they're seen as experts. They lose that expertise the moment they go into sell. But if they maintain the things that they know on a daily basis, they're really welcomed in this conversation. And certainly on a publishing side, that's been a big transformation. And I mean, obviously Adweek does this and plenty of other business-to-business publications do it. But we also know that, the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and Wired magazine and all of these places also have very strong branded content executions. Forbes, who kind of pioneered that at one point, they all have really strong executions in that area to help let brands be part of a conversation with their audience.
And you mentioned there sort of being the experts. Thought leadership is a term that often gets talked about as well in this kind of industry. But I don't know if you agree. Sometimes that term can feel a little bit cliche because perhaps it's a bit overused.
I use it all the time. We use the term thought leadership because people understand it.
Yeah, it's a good way to describe it, but I suppose there's some that do thought leadership well and those that don't do it so well as well, which is perhaps where the negative connotations maybe come from with that kind of terminology.
I just gave a presentation yesterday, and it's one thing we do with some of our clients who come in, and we have a product called Partner Experts. It's a premium thought leadership platform. It's really for people who want to do things on a monthly level and have multiple articles. And so as part of that program, we speak to the people who might be doing some of their writing. We talk about what makes successful thought leadership. And the term that I always use is, right, I don't want to, yes, thought people understand that, but it really comes down to the word of expertise. And so as I go through what has been the part of my career that's focused on doing this, is I always sort of go back and think, what could that brand be considered an expert in? And it's not always directly related to the product line, but it may be, but people are willing to hear that. Years ago, before I was at Adweek, I worked on a project with American Express, and it was in their small business group. Now, American Express, we might think of, their financial services, they have credit cards. They should be talking to me about becoming a merchant. And yeah, sure, they can do that. But the other side is they worked with a huge number of small businesses. And so they were a natural extension of that brand, was to help people start and manage and succeed as a small business owner. And so the ability to do that has nothing to do with taking their charge card for purchases, but they could be seen as an expert in that area. And the audience really wanted to hear from them because they just weren't necessarily getting the advice from other places. They were a reputable source of information. So that fits, I think, with every single brand that's out there. You have to be a reputable source of information. When people see you as an expert, they're more likely to approach you, to work with you long-term, because they see that they're getting ongoing value. Right. And it's no different if you're also, you're going into a shop and you're buying a sweater, or you're buying cookies, or you're buying something from somebody, right? You go to the baker whose things you like, who you have a conversation with, who you feel is an expert baker and understands and might give you something when you're having a dinner party that is different than what you might use, day to day, or I'm having, or you go to a butcher and you know a perfect cut of meat, right? It's really the same thing on all of that. It's that person as an expert. And yeah, their expertise allows you that you're happy to pay a little bit more for that cut of meat because you're getting it from someone whose opinion and insights you respect.
That's a really interesting example as well, with the American Express example, in terms of finding something that maybe the brand and the company that you're working with hasn't thought about doing. In a previous role, I was an advisory editor and worked with consultancies to do the same, to get their thought leadership in front of our members who were executive and non-executive directors. And it was quite tricky sometimes in navigating that. And I'd love to hear from you in terms of how you work with brands when they want to connect with the audience, and they have something to say, but maybe it's not immediately obvious. How do you kind of dig down and find that expertise and what they should talk about?
I can't always locate it, and nor can they. And on a certain level, sometimes, as in anything like this, we find ourselves, trying desperately to save them from themselves. because they, but it's the points of guidance that we offer. And I think when I often start out with this, we want to know who their audience is. Who are you really trying to reach? And then what we want to do is we want to encourage them to write to the audience and to focus things on not what's important to them, but what's important to the people that they want to communicate to. And it's very hard sometimes to get people out of that. Again, you have your own expertise. We all live within our businesses. We communicate with our peers and our colleagues, and we talk to them day to day about the things that we do. And we come out with a new product and we all love it and we talk about it. And we talk about it incessantly and we understand all the features that we have and all of those things. And then, you go out to an audience and they don't always care about that stuff. You know what's important to you. You have to know what's important to them. And the moment you discover that, your conversation changes. You lead with something different. I mean, I'm sure you face this at Shorthand. You add all these new features into things. You think that they're great. They're going to change how people do it. And then you realize that the audience doesn't necessarily see it. And you know that they're going to use it eventually. But you find out really what they need. And, sometimes you need a little bit less, or you want to accomplish something a little bit differently, and then it comes through. But for you to be an expert in storytelling, right, a very natural extension, even though essentially you're a technology company and you're developing a platform, and it makes everything really easy for us when we're doing things like this. But you are trying to own storytelling as you do this, because that's really the people who you're trying to reach, what they want to be able to do and tell those things more effectively. I'm sorry if I just told you what you do for a living, Dawn. Okay, let me apologize for just seeming just a little bit.
No, not at all. It's really interesting what you're saying in terms of connecting with the audience as well, and how different brands, regardless of what they do, can do that. And something that we found is that the use cases that Shorthand use for are actually so much broader than we originally thought. And that, our CEO, Ricky Robertson, recently posted on LinkedIn about how our customers are using Shorthand in ways that we didn't anticipate. And they're kind of finding those new use cases. And now we're kind of diving into that after doing those, sort of customer interviews and understanding that a bit more. So really getting close to the audience to understand what they want, so we can connect with them better. And I suppose the brands that are coming to you for that sponsored content, you're well connected with that audience that you're in front of, so you know them well, and you can guide them on that in terms of how they can connect with and reach the audiences that they want to.
We do our best, because I mean, do we know our audience? Yes. Could we know our audience better? Probably. But we know that there are things that they respond to and terminology that they respond to that does not necessarily match the terminology that people are using. And while our sponsors are using, and while they may see that as an effective way to reach out to people, again, what we can do for them is we can help them become better communicators or better storytellers. And that's really, so many of the people we work with are tech companies in one form or another, because every company now is a tech company in one form or another, but they all get caught up in their own jargon. And geez, they're marketers, and who loves jargon more than a good marketer, right? Who wants to just speak in acronyms? I mean, combine technology and marketing, and you can just have entire conversations in acronyms and jargon. We want to avoid that. Sure, it creeps in. Sure, we find ways, but it doesn't take away the basic foundation of good stories, right? Another show, don't tell. And you think that show, don't tell, right? Which is as far as I'm concerned, is like what I've always been told to do, and I've always encouraged others to do, is a really hard thing for a lot of people to do, right? If you tell someone you're the best, they're never going to listen to you. You tell someone that you have a radical new approach to doing something, they're like, yeah, Sure, that doesn't mean anything to anyone, but we all want to tell them we're this way, and that's sales language. But if you show them something, your goal is not to tell them it's a radical new approach. Your goal is to communicate to them and have them come to you and say, wow, that's a really radical new approach. And the moment you do that, that's your success. You've gotten your positioning or your benefit over to the person you're reaching. They have that enlightened moment because you've shown them things, and therefore they own that. Look, it's no different, right? Any parent would know, when you communicate with your children, you want them to have the idea, not you to tell them what they need to do, but you want them to see that and to have that desire going forward. And yeah, on a certain level, if you want to find a good manager, they've probably been a kindergarten teacher or something like that, right?
And really good content like that, when you're showing them as well, is usually visual and is really shareable as well. And if you can share it, sort of word of mouth, or sort of via social channels, is such a great way to spread information. So if you wow the audience, and then it transcends them, and they share it elsewhere, that's another great sign of content, and that kind of show don't tell element.
Yeah, and getting the audience's attention.
Yeah,
and telling them something they may already know, but finding a different way because everyone else has been telling them the same thing. It's not unusual. I would often, like, how many times can we write the same story? And there are certain topics, because they're topical, that we find people wanting to cover again and again and again. And I mean, as an example, we produced a piece. It wasn't a short, it was a guide, a printed piece or a PDF, which are things that we do. And there was probably a 3 or 4 month stretch a few years ago where there were 3 products or 3 requests for something on connected television. It was like, the world of CTV, best practices for CTV. And how can we do this, serve these clients, and tell it, want to do the same thing again? And, you can't just keep putting out things with pictures of screens on them and the same format. And, it's a new way of television. Yes, it is. And yes, people needed this information. But if we don't find unique formats and unique ways for delivering that, and unique visuals or different framing for that same story, we're just doing the same thing. So we are neither serving our audience, number one, or serving our client, which of course in branded content are the 2 things that you always have to do. You can't do one without the other. If you serve your client without serving your audience, the audience isn't going to read it. And if you serve your audience without also serving the client, they're not going to be happy that what you're communicating. And so you always have to strike that balance. But if you tell the story the same way again and again and again, as I'm sure you can imagine, people are not going to pay attention. So we always are looking for new and inventive ways of framing a story. And that's certainly the things that we do when we're using shorthand, right? When we're doing the immersive stories that we do, is we have to think, how do we tell on each one of these that story in a unique way with unique framing? And those are always, that's where, for my team, the creativity comes through, and we're looking for really, unique ways to explain something so people are paying attention, because everyone else is out there trying to explain the same thing.
Well said. And just moving on to some challenges. So what are some of the challenges that you're facing in the advertising industry at the moment? And, just a food for thought on this one to start with, is the dominance of Facebook and Google one obvious factor? Are there other kind of challenges that you're struggling with?
Yeah, people will tell you that's what they struggle with, and what our audience struggles with. And yes, there are multiple things like that. And look, Facebook is a dominant power. Meta, let's just go that way, right? Because if you look at, again, where is social media and what are brands using, it is still primarily on the social side. It's still Facebook and Instagram, depending on where you are. And that remains a dominant channel. Now, are people shifting their spending in that area? Yes. I mean, every advertisers have gone to Facebook and Instagram because they got a return on Facebook and Instagram. And they knew if they spent money there that they could actually, that they were seeing it was helping. As it goes on, if it's not doing the same thing, yes, they're looking. And again, I've seen multiple articles and people can read this the same way. Are they reapportioning their budgets? Yes, undoubtedly. Does that mean that they're all going on TikTok? No, we're not necessarily talking about that, but they may be going in other channels. And yes, scale is important and the ability to reach people. And that's really what it ultimately comes down to. Does it mean that, is Google a dominant force in advertising? Absolutely. Is Facebook a dominant force? Absolutely. Is Amazon a dominant force? Absolutely. And in advertising, I mean, I'm not talking about in commerce, keep going. Is Apple a dominant force? On a certain level, they are, even though they're not necessarily an ad powerhouse, right? Their business model is not necessarily about advertising, but they have an enormous impact on that because of the phones that we carry, with us constantly. It's just a changing, each step is different. How you go about it is different. It is, I'm sure, for the audience of advertisers, finding that right mix. Again, I cannot tell you what, people talk about connected TV today because TV advertising is changing. And sure, we run various stories that talk about people's success in that area. But I think for so many people, again, there are so many channels, okay, that anyone can purchase an ad in. And that's because there are so many channels that audiences go through when they do these things. So, and the process that you do, Dawn, is probably different than the process that I do. Or the process that I do is different than my 20-something child does when he searches for, so I may search and if I want to buy a new product, I might go here to look for things. Others go, I might go first to Google and look up reviews of something, and others may go to Facebook, or others may go to Amazon and see the large selection of pieces. Some may go and talk to their peers and may go on Facebook, or they may go on Instagram or look for things that show up because, you're buying a new set of plates and you follow people who do place settings. I don't know, is there an Instagram place? I'm sure there's an Instagram table setting community out of all of this, right? That's where people go to get this information. So wherever they go to do all that stuff, that's what advertisers have to think about. And they have to think about the message that they do at that particular moment, because the message that I want to get on Google as I'm looking for something is going to be very different than the moment I go and start my shopping on Amazon or eBay or something like that, as we go forward and do some of these things. It's, again, all a process. I can tell you about my recent purchases, but it's, again, everyone is going to be a little different. And as I said, I am not I'm still a digital immigrant in my world, right? I'm a rather experienced immigrant, but it's not like I grew up in a digital world. But I have children who are not just digital natives, right? But who are, one is more digital native, one is more a social media native and mobile native. And, maybe to them, I'm still speaking in a bit of the old country accent on some of this, but these are the things that we all have to go forward on, right? It's generational, it's the habits, and it's all the things that we all do, and every person is unique. That's the challenge. If there's a challenge in marketing, that is the number one challenge, right? You can't do everything for everybody. You have to be able to personalize an experience for somebody, and you have to do it in a way that is decidedly not creepy. And that's really hard, because we've all been creeped out.
Yeah, well, because the saying goes, go where your audience is, isn't it? But like you say, how do you find that right balance, I guess, across all of the different channels that you could go to, and how do you find that balance once you're in those platforms or channels as well, about not being creepy?
And how do you deliver the best experience? Look, I'm going to give you an example of creepiness, okay? But it wouldn't be for everybody, and this has nothing to do with advertising. But a friend of mine will tell the story of at the time he was an actor, and he was going every day he had auditions, because that's what working actors do. And you never, if you're lucky, every 4 months one of those auditions pans out. And so as he would come home from his auditions, he would stop at the local greengrocer, and he would go to the counter, and they had these nice cookies at the front. And he would buy one of those and have it and, go home. And that was sort of the way he would salve his ego after something like this. And one day he was coming back, and he went into that greengrocer, and he was buying something else. And as he got to pay, the person looked at him and said, "Cookie, cookie." Now, that's a great example of this. And he was so embarrassed by this that he just couldn't go back in there. Now, it's a great example of overstepping your bounds on personalization. Personalization was knowing that every day he would come in and want to get a cookie. And he'd be very happy to get that cookie, and he didn't really want to talk about that cookie. And maybe he felt a little guilty buying the cookie, whatever it was. But the moment it was noticed by somebody else and a little bit just overstepping, it totally shifted his perspective on everything. Now, it became a great story for him, but that is what brands, as we think this through, have to do. They need to know that I'm doing cookies, and they probably want to find out that they have enough at the counter, knowing that every single day this person is going to come in, and you want to make sure it's there. But you have to decide, what's the value of that? And, you might, maybe it's you're communicating, hey, we just got in these different types of cookies. You might want to try one of these. That's okay. But just that little nudge and wink, it stopped him right there. And, it's, as we talk about privacy and everything like that, it is that fine line as we go back and forth.
Yeah, and some people really like that personalization, like you say, but some people it's just too much for them. What do you think about sort of the notion of audiences being able to kind of choose their own journey?
I think it's great. I have a lot of opinions. Have you figured this out yet, Doug?
This is great. This is good. Love opinions.
When you think of personalized experiences and all the things that come with it, and everything that is ultimately algorithm driven, so much of this, there is a very fine line, because you are ultimately giving people not necessarily, well, what you're doing is you're giving them things based on what that they're identifying. And that can be useful. But there's another sense in this world of experiencing things that you've never seen before, and enjoying kismet, right, is almost the term I use. And I think, Netflix and Spotify and Amazon, okay, right? Those are, if you identify personalization, those are three great examples of it. And we always think, right, we go in Netflix or choose your channel, and based on what you've watched, we're going to recommend other things to you. Or you go on Spotify, and I'll probably use that as the example. You listen to certain things, so we're going to tell you what's coming up all the time. And well, guess what? I want to know some of that, but I want to also be surprised. And so, in my life, and if you were to ask my 20-year-old self, what I wanted to be, I wanted to be writing about music. And I always did that. And it remains a hobby of mine, and it remains a passion of mine. And I always want to stay on top of things, on what's going on in music and all of these things. But when I think of how I have done music discovery in my life, there were plenty of times where I would go into a record store, and what's playing, you go into a small shop, and what's playing in the speakers there it would be like, what is that? That I like that. And I've never heard of that before. And it might be something that I've never heard in my life, but something about it is bringing me in. An algorithm is never going to give me that sense of surprise and discovery. It may occasionally surprise me, it may occasionally deliver things, but it's ultimately limiting my view. And while some of that, the promise of the internet was always the long tail, and we always think of that, right? I mean, that was the article, right? You would look at that and it would be, well, the internet is the place where you can read People magazine, but you can also find this really cool blog that only reaches 200 people and focuses on a very arcane topic that is of interest to you. That long tail is really sort of hidden in a world of algorithms, and it actually limits even the top of that. And so that, I guess, when we think of personalization, and I guess that was where the question on this started, is we have to think of like, what is the experience that somebody wants? But what do we also do to ultimately, right? Because if the point of personalization is to delight somebody, what are the other things that can potentially delight them? Because that they are willing to take a chance on, right? If you go into a restaurant and you only order the same thing, right? You're going to live in a life of grilled cheese, and maybe you're not discovering, I don't know, pick the cuisine that you just had for the very first time at one point, or somebody or your friend said, you've got to try this, and you went along on, and now it's part of what you do. We have to make sure that we have our worldview that is, we want our personalized experience because we want to go to the place where the person knows our name and knows our drink order and can recommend other things that they've seen we like. But you also have to find some of those other places as well and have that sense of discovery and that sense of surprise and that sense of joy, because that is where the joy in life ultimately comes from. Did I get to the point on that? I just kept going on and on.
You did. It's such an interesting point, actually, and it feels like there's a real juxtaposition at the moment in terms of like the sort of habits that are forming online, because the web is a bigger place than it ever was. There's more information out there than there ever has been, and yet it's so easy to get stuck in the same rhythm with the algorithms that are there and they're presenting to us. For example, if you are on a social channel, you're sent down this kind of hole that's directing you to all of these very specific things that are related to other things that you've looked at, and kind of creating that journey for you. And yet there's this whole other world out there. There's, as I say, more information than there's ever been, and yet you're being guided towards the same kind of repetitive things over and over again. So your world is actually becoming smaller.
Right. Well, I guess what I would say is algorithm is not a substitute for curation. As part of that, and as if we're going to bring our conversation full circle, it is right. Curation is, I have a respected expert, and that person has recommended something to me in the past, and that person could be a friend, or that person could be a columnist, or whomever, a critic, right? That the things that they recommend, and you start to respect their opinion. So when they tell you something else, I want to find out more. Okay. It doesn't mean that, again, it's just to sort of, again, we all still need guides to help us through the world, and who we choose and who we like, right? It's why we read, and why one might read nonfiction about things, because you want someone to guide you through that. They've spent the time to immerse themselves in this, let them tell you that story, and we have to continue to discover. Doesn't mean I don't want to have like the world, like every single album ever produced, in my pocket at any time. But, that's an awful big ask of me to actually have to go with, like, I sometimes have enough trouble going to my shelves and finding the thing that I want. If you enlarge that, like, how am I ever going to find it? And yes, we need help finding things, but what we need the help with is tell me some of the things that I've liked in the past and maybe point something out, but also give me a few guides who can point me to the places which your algorithm isn't going to give me.
Absolutely. Brilliant.
So that's so with all that, those are the challenges of advertising, and that's how I approach creativity. Not to go off topic too much, but
well, that brings me really nicely on to the next question. So, sort of with that creativity in mind, sort of moving on to talking a bit more about workflows now. And I think it's becoming common in content marketing to maybe complain of the hamster wheel of production, and that complaint is often a big part of traditional journalism as well, and just kind of feeling stuck in that kind of cycle. How do content professionals escape that trap and keep creativity going as well?
It's a challenge. So I would break it down in sort of a few areas, and that is, start with just finding things that inspire you. Okay. There are tasks we all have to do, and the hamster right of doing right. And I think I was even saying this, writing the same story again and again and again. Go outside and find ways to be inspired. I like to go into bookstores and magazine shops, and I like to flip through things. I like to go online sometimes, yes, right? But again, not with a goal, and see where the internet sometimes takes me. I just like to know what's out there, and what excites people. And then the other thing I would say is do things to entertain yourself. And it's funny that way, but if we have to tell the same story again, it's like I want to do it in a way like I want to feel when I'm done with it. I'm approaching it differently, and it's some of the things that we do. And so an example of a recent piece, and I think I shared this with you because we just published it a few weeks ago. Another story about helping people with their data policy and getting out of silos. And I can toss the jargon here, but it doesn't really matter. So, how do we tell the story again of doing this? So what we did is I don't know where we came up with the idea or how it came through, but I started to think about role-playing game cards, right? Magic the Gathering or Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or, there are a number of these, right? Because you're always looking to defeat this person, right? You have to have like the challenge, and you have to have the power up that comes through. So what we did is we used that as the foundation of telling the story. And essentially what we did is we tried to create cards of, and I think maybe the term came up, and maybe what inspired me is someone used the term a data gatekeeper. And I just thought, well, data gatekeeper, like that could be in a card deck. And so we came up with other people like that. And, if you play these card games, and I'm going to admit I know them, I see them, I have no idea how to play them. But, you hear about it. And so we said, data, that's the inspiration. What is a data gatekeeper? It's like, why isn't he a crypt keeper? Whatever it is, as you can go on. And so that became the inspiration. And we said, okay, let's create these cards. So let's find someone who can do it. But what's the joke in all of this? So what's the other inspiration? Do you know the show What We Do in the Shadows? Do you have this? So
yeah.
So who is the most powerful vampire in this is not the one dressed in frills, but is Colin Robinson, right? He sucks the energy out of people. He is, he's wearing the short sleeve button down, and we all have him in our office or in our lives. It's a hilarious joke on that show, but that's why can't we call the person who is, managing your data a monster, right? Because they're keeping you from having access to it. Or why can't we call the person who, the data delayer, right? The person who, and maybe it's not a person, it's a process, but when you want real-time data to make a real-time decision, is giving you reports from things that are 6 months back because it takes them that long because they don't have the processes to do things in real time, right? We could set up these things as challenges. just to tell her. So we're telling it in a different way, but the story is the same and the end result is ultimately the same. Learn about these things, understand it, but we want to do it in a way that is a unique approach to it, because as part of that, where does inspiration come from, and where, and it was fun to do. So we all, as a team, right, the team felt really good about this. It was something fun. It kept us entertained, even though we were telling a story that we could have told in a very straightforward way. It was not as enchanting that way. I guess maybe that's the term to use on something like this. So creative, right? The hamster wheel is real. It always has been. Everybody right? I'm doing the same thing again and again and again. Creativity blooms when you allow things from the outside to creep in, when you do all those things, but at the same time, you understand the restrictions of what you have to do, so that you have to use that creativity in a way that still meets the same goal. And you do have, again, your right, your technological restrictions, your creative restrictions when working with clients, your client's appetite for doing things in a different way. But, have a little bit of fun with it and think of the things that inspire you and use those, and then go the next step. And be willing to talk about that inspiration, because that's an important part of it all.
Is there, in your view, is there a right balance that one should strive to meet in regards to that? So in terms of reaching that balance between the pieces that are always going to stick with you, that the team, entertains the team, entertains the audience, and you do that, so you do it a little bit differently and it's really memorable. How do you strive the right balance between those kinds of pieces, though, and then maybe the more kind of run-of-the-mill pieces that you're doing? Because I guess every piece can't be like that, or maybe it can. Maybe that's what you should strive to do.
Yeah, maybe that's, but no, because time, energy, and resources don't always allow for all of that.
Yeah.
Nor, as I would bring in, the appetite for a client. As I said, we have to balance the needs of the audience and the needs of the client, and make sure that both are met, which is not always the easiest thing in the world. Sometimes you don't do it that way, and you don't do it that way on purpose, and it still does well, and it still meets the needs of the audience. And so if it's still meeting the needs of the audience, you ultimately have to do that. And if you do it and you follow that direction, it's not meeting the needs of the audience, then kind of shame on you for not pushing back at that time. Again, I sometimes describe us in a content studio or on the webinar side of the business as someone's consultant, right? We are there to provide counsel to people. And, there are going to be, and our job is not different from a counsel, from a lawyer. And we know that, of course, the person who represents themselves in court has a fool for a client, right? Isn't that the cliche? And it's the same, right? We're here to counsel you. You can listen to us, and I hope that you do, because our goal is to move you in the right direction. But we all know is when one counsels somebody, they don't always want to hear you, or they have their own way of doing things. And so sometimes we have to incorporate that into it, but we have to think of that end result. And sometimes, again, on another side, the client is always right. And we also know that that's not true. But sometimes you have to nod and put it out, and you do that. And you see, and I'm just going to add in, sometimes you get surprised and it does well. And then you want to know why did it do that? And maybe there was something in there. And so let's learn from that too. All right. I mean, but yes, it is a balance. Sometimes you do things and I will tell you, we've done pitches, and I will tell you that our best idea was not the one that was chosen, or the idea we wanted to do. But that doesn't mean anything. I mean, ultimately, yeah, it could have been more fun, or it could have gone in that direction. But again, if we have to design and develop within the restrictions, some of those restrictions are going to come from the client, and we have to work with that. And if we fail to, we're not serving them.
Yeah. And obviously each client that you're working with is going to be different in terms of their appetite for risk, I suppose, or the way they're thinking about the content and how risky it could be doing something different. And I guess my terminology there, kind of a more run-of-the-mill piece, is perhaps not right, because just because a piece is maybe a more kind of basic format, like a Q&A or something else, it doesn't mean it's not going to, like you say, serve the needs of the audience. It could do exactly what it's intended to do, but it might not be that kind of fun, entertaining piece that you remember forever. But at that time, it may do exactly what it needs to do.
That's the old, it ultimately comes down to what is success on each of these. And success is ultimately, on things that are content driven. We are looking for people we want a few page views. We want to make sure it gets to the broadest possible audience. And then we want to look, are they spending time on the page? Are they engaging with it, right? Because that's our proxy for, are they engaging with the content? Because we don't have the ability to sit on everybody's shoulder and actually watch them doing this stuff. I'm sure there's somewhere that's possible, but that is a little creepy. But with all of that, but we have to understand like what success looks like. And so if we can be successful with a run-of-the-mill piece, like, great, it's done what it's supposed to, because it's serving that. Like, you don't want to over design. And I think that's, if you look at design principles on anything, it's totally fine to have functional design, right? I mean, a set of stairs is a set of stairs. You have to go up them, and we've probably been on our shares of over-designed staircases, and it, right. But the goal was ultimately to go from floor 1 to floor 2, and as long as we can do that, then those stairs are ultimately successful. We can talk about like all of that with design principles and anything like that. Functional design is really, really important. There's nothing wrong with doing something that's functional. Right. There's always the risk of over design. And so I don't need to tell, right? And I talked about that stuff, like, not everything has to get the same treatment of finding different frameworks to approach things, because not everything needs that. You can just be functional. Doesn't mean you can't be interesting, but you just need to communicate.
And when the clients are coming to you for that help, for that guidance, for that consultation, how has the conversation around success changed somewhat over the last kind of couple of years? You talked about like traffic, time on page, which we're all very used to. Are there any other kind of measures of success that are coming in now that you're having these kind of conversations with clients? Has that changed at all?
It depends on the execution.
Okay.
On a certain level, we have to have those expectations clear. And there are things that we do where the success metric is things like downloads, right? We don't want people to spend time on a page. We want them to take an action. And so we have to look at that. And there are other functions of all of that, right? Of the people who are downloading it. Are they the right people? Is it the right audience? On a certain level, as a publisher, people are coming to us because we have that audience. And if I start to refine it even further, that's not the direction we go in. But there are those that look at that, right? I have to reach, Fortune 500 CMOs. And that's an audience. And so, right, are we doing this so that it can do that? Well, in my world, if I have to, if my promise to you is I'm going to get you 300 downloads of something and you only want to reach Fortune 500 CMOs, well, so I have to get a response from 60% of an audience. That's probably not going to be very likely on what this is. So having clear expectations on this. But the other side is, yes, we always have to gauge performance. And right, because I am in a line of business that has, in order for us to have a repeat customer, we have to see these things perform. And there are things that we're going to do that might not be as good, but that's what we ultimately have to do, because that's the promise that we're making. So we want to ultimately fulfill on that promise, because that, again, serving those needs of that balanced need of the advertiser and the audience has some of this. So we have to make sure that those things are doing it. And there are things that we can control as a content developer. So if we're doing a custom project, we can control the messaging and the creative that we do that with a clear understanding of our audience. Therefore, we can do that. But there are other times where if we don't have control over like an asset, right? That's the terminology of something in the world of lead generation. We can't guarantee and be a success. We can do our best to do things. We can target, we can help on positioning, we can do all those things. We can work with what is within our control of doing this. So to answer your question, yes, it's not just page views and engagement. Sometimes it's actions. We're not at the point where like we follow things through, but I'm sure there are, right, where there are content developers who are doing things where they have to see it as their content having an impact on sales. Right. So if you're sharing recipes about Dijon mustard because you make Dijon mustard, I don't know where Dijon mustard just came out of my head on that. You want to see if those recipes that you've done are actually boosting sales because it was in a large retailer's communication and recipe thing that they sold out through, and it went through, and now we are actually seeing people taking that step and changing their brand preference and things like that. Like the things we do don't get measured at the cash register, but there are those who are going to be doing that.
Yeah, and I suppose from your side, again, in that advisor role, when the brands are coming to you, is you're going to play back to them some of the benchmarking that you're doing and the previous content that you've put out as well, in terms of what they could perhaps achieve. And when you are looking at those more entertaining, the pictures that you're, the pieces that you're always going to remember, when you're sort of pitching those ideas to clients, do you reference back the other pieces that you've done and how successful they've been?
In a blinded way, because of course the other side is I never want to share the results of a past piece with a new client, because there's a good chance they could be competitors, and maybe the one doesn't want to know what the other. But yes, look, the number one thing that we have faced recently is we have had enormous demand for the immersive stories that we produce. And why as a product that we've now offered for multiple years are we suddenly seeing a huge spike? And I think it's because of the executions that we did in the fourth quarter of last year were a little different, a little bit more creative, and attempting some different things. And as those got seen by not only our readership of market, right, but sometimes our readers are also our advertisers, people saw that and said, I want this. And, past execution is a great opportunity for future business. So, right, nothing works like showing past work when you're in a creative industry, right? You want to do those things. So I'm sure,
show,
right?
not tell.
So that let them see it. Let them see what we've done for somebody else. And, we can talk about like sort of general success and, had strong, right? It had a high demand for, or it had a high number it had to meet, and it met that number. And that's, again, what our sales team does, but certainly as I support them in the things that they do, what we try to have that. But, it's nice to put something out and to have somebody's phone ring and, for me to get a Slack from someone on our sales team that said, that was really good. I just heard from these people who really loved it and they want to know how they can do it too. And that's very flattering. And that certainly is another sign of internally is our success.
It's fantastic going through the referrals of that word of mouth, other people seeing what you're doing and other brands wanting a piece of that pie.
Exactly.
So
they liked what it did. And, that's great. We like that. It helps us through. It's nice for people to knock on your door and want what you have.
Definitely. And part of this podcast is, we want to give advice to others kind of looking to either they're already in this industry or they're looking to get into a similar space of work. So what advice would you give to someone looking to work in the media and advertising industry today, sort of more generally?
Run away. No, no, I don't, not at all. Great question. Because, of course, working in advertising or working in media or any of these areas, right, it's what do you want to accomplish and what do you have? The piece of advice I heard not long ago from, I think it was a post I saw from Scott Galloway, the NYU professor. He's out there all the place. And I'm not sure whether he was just paraphrasing somebody else, but as he thinks of people, which is you don't have to find your passion. You just have to find something that you're good at and then work at it hard and get better at it. And so that would be, something that sort of stuck with me, because people are often like going to advertising. It's because I'm passionate about, great creative. Well, yes, sometimes you have that, but sometimes there are careers in other areas that are related to it. Okay, I started my career as I said, I wanted to write record reviews, but when you are paid somewhere in the mid to high two figures for your contribution, that's probably, not, sure, it's nice to have your weight in vinyl or CDs or whatever it is. On the other hand, it helps to be able to pay the bills and support things. So, right, that was maybe nice thing to do as an avocation, not a vocation. Or we have things that we are passionate about, but other times we find the things that are related to the things that we're passionate about and do well. You might want to make movies, but really you find that you're just really good at sound editing. Okay. Or you might, and fill in your blank on that. I might want to create great ads, and you find out that really what you're very good at is, managing production teams. And there's no harm in going down that direction, right? There are lots of people involved in industries who do all sorts of things and find themselves because they're very, very good at it. So what I would say is, know your passions, know the things like that, but ultimately find the things that you're good at and continue to do them and do better. So I guess that's a recommendation for people who want to look in advertising and media, and maybe it's also for people who, in creative industries, and maybe it's recommendation for people in other areas, because that's really where you'll find your success ultimately.
I think that's really good advice, Stuart. And sort of going back on your bio as well, I know that you made the change, of course, from being in journalism into where you are now. So the advice you've given there, is that sort of reflecting back on your sort of transition from journalism to what you're doing now as well?
I got kind of bored being I was a business journalist. I wrote about the computer industry. I did that, and I could have probably continued, and at various times I probably took turns, and maybe, hindsight always sees the other road. But with some of those things, how did I get involved writing about computers? Because trust me, I had no sense of the electronic before I went in there, but I learned it. And I learned what it took to succeed. And I wrote about things that are, sometimes things that we know about, and sometimes were, the parts of the electronics world that nobody really knows, right? How you make a semiconductor. I had a beat at one point of writing, leading semiconductor production equipment and test and measurement. It's not like I graduated from college and I came out and said, really what I want to do is I want to understand photolithography and wafer steppers, right? Those were the things that we wrote about. But it was a good story, and it was ways that you can go down that path. It just happened to be the way that it took me. It took me down one way. I made a transition at one point. I worked as a freelancer for a chunk in there. I found other things. I ended up doing things that were a little bit more sponsored in that world or for clients. It took me down this path. I ended up at Adweek. It's been a good move. I've been very, I've had a really nice 10-year ride there, and I'm very happy to have had it. And I look forward to what comes next on some of those things. Is it the path I envisioned? No, probably not. Has it been a good path? Yeah. Were there plenty of mistakes along the way? Absolutely.
Thanks for your honesty. I can relate so much as well. I ex-journalist, real life journalism followed by business journalism in a membership organization, and now I'm at a SaaS organization doing customer success. So we never quite. It's interesting the paths that you sort of lay out for yourselves are never quite the ones that you follow, but I think the turns that you make are what makes life more interesting, right?
Absolutely. And where you find yourself, and again, what you ultimately find yourself getting good at. Be good at what you do, and you'll find, and you know what, you also might not like it. And if you don't like what you're doing, fine, you can get good at something else, or find the other parts to stuff. But you don't need to necessarily look. We live in a world of plenty of people making huge career jumps, and it was, look, when my parents, right, it was you looked for a place and you worked there for 40 years. And then in my generation, I have people who've worked certain places for 40 years, but I have lots of people who've worked around and held a variety of different jobs. And I look at the generation of my children and I think, well, they could end up with new careers every 5 years because that's what happens for people. Like, good, follow through on that, but just again, keep building yourself and interesting yourself and keeping yourself entertained. And I think that's usually a pretty good way to proceed on things.
Good advice. Brilliant. And you've lived in New York for a number of years now, haven't you? Are you based in
I'm in New York. I grew up in the New York City suburbs, and I could not wait to move into the 5 boroughs of New York. And I did that early on, and I haven't left.
What's your favorite place in New York to go to? Where you're at your happiest?
Great question, because there's so many. Because I haven't seen any of those places over the past 25 months. I have my haunts in New York City, and I still just love to walk through neighborhoods. I love a good bookstore, so the Strand bookstore and was always a favorite of mine. I love a good record store, but they don't exist anymore. So I mourn the death of other music. I mourn the death of even Tower Records and J&R, which were some of my favorite places here. But that doesn't mean, I love a good jazz club. And so I have missed going to places like that. And I keep looking like, what is my first step in New York to do? And it's like, well, I'd love to go to the Village Vanguard again or something like that when I'm comfortable. I like to go to the theater and see a good show. And, I love a good meal and a good restaurant, and I like to go, like to hop in the car and drive to Queens, which I know maybe, and go to Chinatown and Flushing, or go into Elmhurst for, Thai food or Indian food. I mean, because there are, as we have our various enclaves, and finding restaurants and new things like that. Like, those are the things that I really over the years have enjoyed, that I've tried to pass on to my children and that my wife and I like. Or, going to the Bronx Botanical Gardens, which is a place, certainly I live in the Bronx now, that we love and has always been a respite and a calming place and things like that. Or going to Brooklyn and finding new things. Again, it's always about discovery, right? We live in a city for the vibrancy. It's been really sad not being able to take advantage of the vibrancy recently, but I'm looking forward to doing some of that again, because that's really why we live here.
Yeah, hopefully you can start getting out and about and doing more now.
I'm trying. We got to get over got to get over some of that sense of things and find ways back in. It's there've been some useful habits, but there are some other habits to break from recently, right? So we got to do some of that.
Definitely. Well, we're coming up on time, but it's been so wonderful chatting with you. And I had one final question that I wanted to ask. Are there any companies or publications, aside from Adweek, of course, and we will post some of the wonderful pieces that you've spoken about as well, so the audience listening can go and have a look at those. But yeah, are there any other companies or publications that are doing incredible things that you think that our listeners should follow or look out for?
Good question. Did the blowing my breath come through on some of that one?
It did.
Yeah, I have to. That's such a good question, because I have to think of like the things, like who would I hold up as a model on things? I'm still on a certain level inspired by some of the classics. Right. When I think in terms of publishing and things like that, how do you not love the New York Times? I still do. I've, for years and years and years, and I still find some of that. And yes, they piss me off to a certain degree, and some of the things they do, and like that's fine. Or the New Yorker, which is again just great writing and great storytelling, good books that are out there, and new authors, and discovering new things and new essayists or new approaches, finding new voices. Watch a little too much TV, but there are plenty of new shows that I like. We just got through, Abbott Elementary, which is a very typical network sitcom, but boy, is it well written and well acted. For delivering something that I have to tell you is nice, and not every right. I mean, we've watched things on TV, and during this time, I was just a little tired of like comedy that felt mean all the time. It's nice to have something that feels nice, but I really love the characters, and it's not your typical cast of anything, but the acting is so good and so funny, and I feel like nice afterwards. Like those, sure. So yeah, it all comes down to that. Other things that are doing interesting stuff. Yeah, I mean, find the things that honestly, I often write, be the focus group of one. Find the things that interest you, and stay open to other things, and just find them that you like, and try something new along the way. Find a new taste, find a new song, find a new style of music, find a TV show you would never otherwise watch, find a movie that doesn't seem like every other, right, doesn't have a comic book hero in it, and watch that you think might be boring. Maybe it won't be. Go back to the classics, see some of those things. That's really where I would. Go back. So your answer is like, find the things that are new and that are really interesting out there. Go back to some old things. Let's just make it that. Go back to the classics.
Yeah, good advice. And yeah, like back to your point, that's where you find inspiration. I guess expose yourself to as many things as possible. Get those rich experiences in life, and it'll give you inspiration.
Yeah, look for, that's why. I mean, why is diversity important? Why are all of these things? Because it opens you up to all other things and all other points of view and all the things that are outside of your natural world, because they're all there and they're really interesting and it's really fun. And, just stay open.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Stuart. It's been such a pleasure having you on the Craft podcast.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me, Dawn.
Brilliant. Well, that was a great episode. We have a lot of amazing guests lined up for the future. But if you'd like to come on and talk about content and storytelling on the web, please do get in touch. We'll drop the link in the show notes. But take care, everyone, until next time. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for checking out this episode of The Craft. This show is brought to you by Shorthand, a platform that helps professional content creators produce beautiful stories without writing a single line of code. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow The Craft wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. or visit shorthand.com/podcast to get immediate access to all the latest episodes.